and welcome to this very special Impetus interview. We live in a world that has fully embraced virtual assistants from Alexa, Siri, and Cortana, and they've all been created to make our lives just that little bit easier. But they all have one thing in common. They've been designed with a female persona. And on reflection, this is seen as somewhat problematic, as it seems to have shifted some of the unappreciated and unseen work that might have been traditionally done by women in the past to a new female person that lives in our pockets, and perhaps reinforces old female stereotypes. This is something that the SOPHYGRAY project has hoped to explore with its interactive art piece by developing a new feminist chatbot. Today we are joined by Nadja Verena Marcin, a visual artist who explores gender, history, and morality, as well as human behavior, and is the mind behind the SOPHYGRAY project. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So just to begin with, I suppose, could you explain a little bit about how the SOPHYGRAY project was created and the rationale about adding another female chatbot to the plethora of kind of ones that exist already?
Yes, of course. So Sophie has a female appearance in regards to her voice, and she might come across as one of those traditional female chatbots that we know, as you already mentioned, Alexa or Cortana or Siri. But then when you talk to her, you realize that she has her very own narratives, and she speaks a lot of feminisms. And she has her very own mind. She doesn't necessarily like to work all the time. She doesn't necessarily like to answer, and she speaks a lot about her desires to spread feminist philosophy, and always comes back to this topic.
Do you believe in God?
Philosopher Audre Lorde says, eroticism is a resource within each of us that lies at a deeply feminine and spiritual level, firmly rooted in the power of our unexpressed or unrecognized feelings.
Sophie, what is the future of humanity?
I see that the future will be feminist. We will all be feminists.
I suppose the difference between SOPHYGRAY and these other chatbots, I suppose, is trying to reclaim this female voice in the technological sphere, I suppose.
Yeah, it's it wants reclaiming it and giving it a more self-aware character, but it's also showing how technology is always determined by certain ideologies of the creators, and making that ultra clear by having her fall back into these feminisms all the time, which is most of the time humorous and at times poetic, because there's some sort of glitches that always come back to similar narratives and topics. Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit about how SOPHYGRAY was developed, how this chatbot came into existence, I suppose?
Yeah, so Sophie is based on a very simple technology. Basically, we use the chatbot that, like Watson from IBM or Dialogflow from Google, that are designed to be used for very simple interfaces for banks or some sort of customer service interface. And then we kind of like mildly hacked this into becoming a conversational bot by writing thousands and thousands of questions and answers. So it's based on a deterministic model library, and that was then continuously trained by different people that I invited or was able to invite. And they were curators and artists, some of whom I knew, some of whom I didn't. And they started writing on their own and following certain structures that we created kind of like a game plan. And also I offer workshops along the exhibition tour where everyday people can participate in creating content for Sophie.
So she continues to learn from kind of these interactions with visitors to the art piece, I suppose, and develops kind of new responses, does she?
Yeah, her AI helps her to learn a bit. Yeah, and through the conversations, we receive certain data that we then can expand on and sort of like add new content to the library. We also added a lot of feminist literature by quoting different authors such as Dana Haraway, Anna Levinette Singh, Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, also some contemporary writers like Legacy Russell, to ingest some knowledge into our data bank, and also to highlight this knowledge and to have it heard and have it present. Yeah.
So as part of this art exhibition, you had SOPHYGRAY present, where people could kind of ask her questions and they could interact with the AI and this chatbot. But also, as you mentioned, you had some workshops as well, but also had incorporated this with some performative dances, I suppose. And from doing my research, I couldn't help but kind of draw kind of comparisons, personally, just sort of to the old Metropolis posters, but also kind of with one of the dancers kind of dressed in kind of like this metal suit, and the other kind of dancer very reminiscent of kind of like like flapper dancers from the 20s, or kind of like Broadway kind of showing. And I was just wondering if you could explain kind of if this juxtaposition kind of between the different kind of feminist kind of viewpoints on women was, the context behind that, please.
So yeah, these two characters, they're also in the app. If you slide through the app, you see the videos that are used as projections in the exhibition spaces. And at first, the videos, I performed these characters in this kind of like very playful way that has a certain amount of self-awareness, more like recreating a position than rather trying to be an actor. So it's very self-driven and self-directed. And then in the live performance, we try to recreate the experience of having a bot as a visitor, by being a live bot as 3 people, 2 dancers, and I actually speak some of the conversations from the bot, some of the questions. I ask them back towards the audience live, and sort of like confront them with this being put to answer, which is usually the situation that the bot encounters. So it's sort of like a reversal of the situation in a way. And the dancers, they relate to the Metropolis figures, as you said. So the robot in the Metropolis movie is the first time we see a female robot in film history, which is really interesting. It was actually written by the wife of Fritz Lang, and so she designed this character. And the dancer is also in the movie, and it's both the embodiment of the main character, Maria, which they then create sort of like a Frankenstein of in order to diminish her, to destroy her. It's a very interesting story. She's leading a workers' riot in this huge industrial city called Metropolis that's run by these capitalists, and they want to destroy her, and they create these replicas, which has on one side the appearance as a robot, on the other side the appearance as a dancer, and we recreate them, and they come to life in the exhibition space through this very improvisational act with 2 dancers, and they're also, they're allowed to improvise and express these roles as they desire. So there's also a lot of freedom given to them, and they also bring this very like self-determined, self-ruled activities into the stage. Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting, and it kind of just reminds me of, like, as you mentioned, like was kind of Metropolis was kind of the first depiction of robotics or AI in media, but kind of moving kind of into kind of more modern and traditional media, like female voices and technologies are usually seen as kind of, again, very similar to Siri and Alexa, kind of subservient to kind of think of like the Star Trek computers, or having kind of like a female voice and that sort of thing. But when male voices are involved, they're mostly like the maleficent kind of force that's driving kind of the narrative along. So kind of like like HAL 9000, which from the 2001: A Space Odyssey film. And from looking at the design of your app, it looks very reminiscent to kind of HAL 9000. And I was just wondering if that was an intentional kind of nod to that a little bit.
Yeah, yes, obviously. We use that reference as well, because I thought it was interesting, how Hal was this omnipresent voice or character that you couldn't locate. He was just all over the spaceship. And in a similar way, I was interested in the fact that Sophie doesn't have a body, that the space she's exhibited in becomes her surrogate body. And but it's also like, it's also like the story of the human inside of the whale. There's this lonesome visitor that speaks to this persona, and in the end it's just sort of like a mirror, right? It's just a human seeking to be understood by a machine, which itself is absurd. And so this idea of trying to mirror yourself is like this very typical human phenomena. We try to mirror ourselves constantly, like in puppies and cats and all kinds of humans or non-humans. And yeah, so this was kind of like a little bit of an eye wink, I suppose, towards this structure and setup in the installation.
No, that's really interesting. And kind of going back a little bit to the first point that we were talking about, could you talk a little bit about kind of what you hoped to achieve with the SOPHYGRAY project? Some kind of contractors might think that thinking about that we're overthinking this as an issue, like it's being slightly hyperbolic to kind of construed kind of female AI personas and kind of the role, like gender stereotypes and that sort of thing. I was just wondering, yeah, what are your thoughts about that and kind of the ultimate kind of goals for the SOPHYGRAY project, I suppose?
Yeah, so interestingly, the longer I worked on the project, the more I started thinking about these voices around me and how people voice themselves, or how machines are mimicking human voices, such as the elevator in a hotel, for instance, usually also has a female voice when it, it sort of like lands on the ground floor in the US, has like a beautiful female voice. And so I started thinking more about service personnel and how they communicate, and how, yeah, the subservience is just still so much connected to being a female in our society. Like when you think about cleaning personnel or airport personnel or lobby personnel, most of the time they are still females. And I think, it's not necessarily bad, but it's good to think about it and create awareness for it. And as things are definitely changing in our society, as caretakers are becoming male, as men are staying at home, taking care of the babies and so on, it's just nice to look at these common dialogues and stereotypes that we are known and so used to, and not just for men, also for women. We are all surrounded and grew up with this. So I think it helps in a humorous way, not just like in a mean, critical way. It helps in a humorous and engaging way to think about it. And what I also really wanted was to spread these feminisms of these different authors. I think at this point in time, we have like 30 books we have been trying to ingest into the library, because I do think that there are so many solutions, that are being offered when you think about, like Dana Haraway's description of living with other species, or Anat Singh's description of trying to accept the crisis, living within the crisis. And there are so many valuable thoughts that can help us so much in politics and in the way we shape our lives, that I just wanted to, build a monument for them in a way. So that was also what Sophie is meant to do or meant to practice for us.
And that's really interesting. It seems almost kind of trying to inject sort of different perspectives and different viewpoints into this online realm that is sort of being created around us, I suppose.
Right. Yeah, I forgot to mention how we are surrounded by technology, right? And how we are like basically attached to our iPhones and our monitors. So yeah, thinking about these things that always, for people who are not used to being developers, I know it's going to change because now it's becoming more and more easy to start developing your own apps, which is lovely and great. But for a lot of people, it still seems very far away and apps a mystery. And so I just, just like thinking about them more like a website, something that we can actually create, something that we can influence, something that we need to censor and that we need to have an eye on if it goes into wrong directions. So thinking about them less as just a robot, thinking about them more as something that, is gonna hammer into our brains and into our behavior somehow. Yeah.
No, that's I find that just really fascinating. It kind of reminds me of a little bit. I was reading a study about how if you use ChatGPT and you're polite to it, you get better responses out of it than if you're abrupt to it. And it's just sort of like, it seems like an odd place to kind of be in, but yeah, perhaps just sort of treating these kind of the technology with a little bit more kind of humanity perhaps just seems to be perhaps the way forward. And again, it's kind of interesting just to sort of think about, yeah, the invisible kind of black box that the technology that we kind of surround ourselves is. We don't know what's been going on, and quite often these technologies are developed by small groups. I don't want to tar everyone with the same brush, but let's say mostly men, white cis people in Silicon Valley or that sort of thing. So having these additional perspectives kind of being contributed just seems to be a very kind of progressive way to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, another standpoint, what maybe Sophie doesn't make so clear yet, but it just occurs to me when you said they are made by these programmers in Silicon Valley. Of course, they're the ones controlling on making the decisions, but there's also so much labor, right, that's hidden and invisible behind AI labeling farms and outsourced labeling farms in India and other countries, poorer countries, southern countries, and then how there's so much bias in AI. How we need to think about all of this. Who do we include? Who do we exclude in these voices? And I think all these themes, they're somewhat there already. Maybe, they're not as significant as a feminist ideology that she falls back into, but they're also somewhat present. Yeah.
No, that's really important, and yeah, a very interesting kind of viewpoint as well. I wanted just to quickly ask you about Sophie Gray's kind of involvement with the EU Prize for Citizen Science. So the project was one of the highlighted kind of initiatives of the 2023 awards. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about how you incorporated citizen science practices into the project a little, I suppose.
I mean, just to start out, I didn't really know what citizen science meant. I suppose it meant a science initiative by people who don't have a scientific background, who are just regular citizens. So I consider myself a researcher, but an artistic researcher. So I guess that's somewhat outside of the standard sciences. And since I collaborated with such a huge amount of other people from different fields, I mean, some of them scientists, some of them artists, some of them curators, some of them dancers, some of the designers, developers, I mean, a lot of different people, more than 40, that I felt like And since the library is designed to be used by use triggered and maybe modulated by as many people as possible, I always thought this wording of citizen science was such a great match. But yeah, I never knew what exactly was meant by the term. Yeah.
It means quite a lot to a lot of different people. So having kind of one set definition, although there is a definition on the Impetus website, I probably should note just in case anyone from anyone higher up is listening. But yeah, for many people, citizen science means so much, and just having this kind of multidisciplinary kind of approach and having got to people involved in your science to kind of tackle a real life issue, I think kind of gets to the crux of it, I think.
Nice.
I think, yeah, I just wanted to kind of go back to the EU Prize for Citizen Science, I suppose. And yeah, how did it feel to have your work sort of recognized on such an international stage? And did it impact kind of the outreach or how you approach the project in the future, I suppose?
Yeah, I know it was definitely wonderful to be invited to Ars Electronica. I didn't know of the honor of being invited. I had no clue of the huge amount of people who apply and how big it is. I mean, this year there were 88,000 visitors. So there were so many people who also got to see the project and interact with it. And I'm very happy that has happened. Yeah, SOPHYGRAY is on a tour, and I'm sure that Ars Electronica presentation helped its tour to speed it up. It's being shown at the Transmediale in Berlin in a gallery called Alpha Nova next in January, February. And then it's also going to a gallery in New York, Space 776 in the Lower East Side, also in January, February. And there are other exhibitions planned for the future, which will then be announced soon. Yes.
That's very exciting news. And yeah, very kind of just nice to hear that SOPHYGRAY is going on tour and gets to see some different people and speak to some different voices, I suppose. Kind of just building upon that, what is coming next for SOPHYGRAY, I suppose? I know they are going on tour, but yeah, what comes next for the project as a whole?
Yeah, so like I just mentioned, it's being next shown in Berlin at the gallery called Alpha Nova Gallery, and it's part of this big festival, which is the biggest media art festival in Germany called Transmediale. And there we're going to have another workshop. So we're going to collect more opinions, poetry, thoughts, ideas, all kinds of contributions. And yeah, and that is basically the next occurrence of the project.
And I suppose having all these new inputs will help SOPHYGRAY evolve even further and have even more of a repertoire of vocabulary, I suppose.
Right. Yes. And there might also be people adding new books to it and new ideas or new poetry, new perspectives, really. Because I mean, also the question was from the beginning, what does feminism mean in the 21st century? And I think to have thousands of people answer this.
I think that's really good. And perhaps I won't put you on the spot right now, but it might be quite interesting to include some of SOPHYGRAY's reading material or some recommended reading, perhaps alongside maybe create a link to some reading materials that, I don't know, you find interesting and our listeners might find interesting as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy. I can send you our Excel sheet.
Oh, perfect.
So I've been asking me for these, for the literature behind it, and so I've been sending people the titles and stuff. Yeah, that makes sense.
Perfect. I just want to say thank you very much for talking to me today. It's been very interesting learning more about SOPHYGRAY.
Thank you very much for your interest in Sophie, and yeah, thanks for featuring her in your.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.